Thanks for coming to the first talk of the day, and I hope I can entertain you a bit and move you towards action. So what we're not going to talk about now is about the technical details of what we do day to day, working in the crypto industry, working in the DeFi industry. We're not going to talk about like the consensus mechanisms, private keys, smart contracts. We're not going to talk about collateral, CDPs, stuff like that, because we're going to focus on real human stories from places where alternative financial systems are needed, and are needed very badly. So why do we need an open financial system? I want to introduce you to Lorena. This is a woman, a 48-year-old woman from Venezuela, which is the country where I'm from. And in order to get her wealth out of the country, what she did was she converted her savings, which amounted to about $3,000, her entire life savings, and she converted them into dollars by using the black market in Caracas, which was dangerous, and she exposed herself, but it's the tool that she had. And then in order to cross the border with this amount of money, she hid it everywhere. She hid the bills everywhere. She made braids in her hair and put it in there. She hid it in her bra. She hid it in her shoes. And she was able to cross, and the guards took a little part of it because they searched her, but they weren't able to take everything. And see how she's kind of outsmarting the guards. So this is kind of a call to action or a call to understanding that the day-to-day financial system that we use today, like the way that you transfer money out of a country, the way that you can use your bank account without worrying that an authoritarian government might seize the money and so on, this is something that is of great privilege that we have, and that when we are designing for decentralized finance and alternative finance, I think that we should focus more on the other section of the world who has to contend with these kinds of situations. So at the Open Money Initiative, we are researching how people use money in closed economies and collapsing monetary systems. And our approach is a human-centered design approach. So if you're familiar with IDEO or Frog design, we use a similar and very inspired process where we try to empathize with the people that are living through these situations. We conduct ethnographic interviews, we conduct diary studies, and then we try to make prototypes and product concepts that we feel would address the needs of these people. And the idea is then to iterate this process and to convince companies and institutions to try this out and to design for the people who we feel need it the most. So in a way, it's not like traditional research. We're not quantifying a lot of things, but we are getting at the whys of and the hows of the usage of money. And so it's more like a search. We're searching for patterns. We're searching for outlier behaviors that are interesting and that might shed some light onto how we might be able to design products built on these amazing protocols that we have today to move money around without central authorities' permission. And so we did ethnographic interviews. We did 11 interviews in Colombia, 6 interviews in Venezuela. We focus on these cities, which is a kind of a varied sample. Again, the idea is to get a little bit of the rural, get a little bit of the city, and see how people from different backgrounds kind of relate to money and how they use money in a day-to-day basis. And so we did a diary study as well. And then we did what we call displacements, which are small tests where we, for example, transfer cryptocurrency to a person and then ask the person to buy things using cryptocurrency for a week and report back. And so these are things that a person wouldn't ordinarily do in their lives, but it can reveal what pain points there are and what the understanding of these technologies are in in the life of the person. And again, I want to stress that we didn't focus just on cryptocurrency. We focused on generally how people use money and how they're surviving in these situations. And so the process looks like this. After we do the interviews, we annotate, we separate into post-its, and then we try to find patterns within the data, the qualitative data, and then we try to condense this. And my job now is to try to present it to you in a fashion that it's digestible, understandable, and then we could have a conversation about it. So we organized our insights into 3 groups, and it's all about access. So how do we get people access that is to a financial system that is confident, resilient, and open? And so in the theme, the confident theme, let's talk about how people relate to confidence in their day-to-day lives. So networks of people have replaced the roles of companies and institutions. In Venezuela, institutions like government institutions or like banks don't operate in the normal ways that we are used to here. And so what ends up happening is that people end up trusting more, putting more trust in their neighbors, putting more trust in their local vicinity, in their extended families, and so on. And so I want to show how people conduct, for example, money transfers, because you can't move money in and out of the country, and I'll explain this a little bit more later. You have to use social networks you turn to social networks to know where you might be able to find a way to transfer money. So there are Facebook groups that advertise, hey, I'm sending money to these banks in Venezuela. All you have to do is to dial my cell and then meet me somewhere, and then I'll make sure the money goes through. And so, as you can imagine, these situations are rife with scams, and sometimes most often they do provide valuable services, but people are they don't have a way to fight or to they don't have recourse if these transactions go wrong, right? And so one other thing that people use a lot is WhatsApp groups. And for example, this is a money changer that we interviewed, and he sends an image every day with the current rate that he's selling at. And then the people that know him, his local networks, his local vicinity, they tell him, hey, can we meet today at the supermarket? I'll give you the money, and then then he goes and transfers it to Venezuela. And I'll explain a little bit more about how that happens. And then people use this feature of WhatsApp, which is a lot like Instagram stories, and intermingled with their stories of how they're living their lives. They advertise for money services. And so this happens because if you want to move money out of a country like the UK, for example, it's easy. You just contact your bank. You tell your bank, hey, wire this money to the US. And if you don't like the fact that your bank charges you a lot of money for it, you can use something like TransferWise, and it's still easy. So it's only one move across systems. In the sense, in the perspective of the user, it's very easy. In Venezuela, what you have to do is if you want to move money out of Venezuela, you need to find someone that has a bank account in Venezuela so you can transfer money to that person. And then that person needs to have a bank account abroad, and you also have to have a bank account abroad so that you can arrange another transfer. So as you can imagine, most people don't really have accounts in 2 places. And so what happens is you try to find an intermediary that can do it for a fee. And when these services are not regulated or organized, and sometimes in Venezuela, and in some occasions, these services have been considered illegal, then of course there are situations where you can't get your money back because you can't contact the police to tell them that you exchanged money, because then you did something wrong. And so another thing is that in Venezuela, every transaction is forced to feel like a drug deal. And so this is me trying to move money to Venezuela. And there's this guy in Colombia, in the border between Colombia and Venezuela, that receives my money, even though he has a window and it looks institutional, so on. He doesn't really have permission to send money to Venezuela. So what he does is he sends a WhatsApp to his partner in a WhatsApp message to his partner in Venezuela, and he he tells the person my phone number, and then they will reach out when the transfer has been completed, and they will send me a screenshot, and he reassures me everything will be all right. But this all feels very sketchy. Like it doesn't feel like an experience where my money is safe or where I'm being protected. And so a lot of transactions are like this, and not only to exchange money, but also when you want to buy milk or some scarce product that in Venezuela there are not a lot of merchants that can sell milk and that have the license, and sometimes there are price controls. So you go to the basement of the supermarket to receive the goods. So like there's a lot of situations where you feel like you're doing something wrong when it would be considered perfectly natural in some other parts of the world. Another thing is that, surprisingly, despite scarcity and economic collapse, some people are thriving. So this is a quote that we got from a person in Caracas who's doing very well. He says, hyperinflation has made some millionaires. I got $1 million loan in Bolivars, exchanged it in the black market, and bought an apartment in New York City. The following year, I paid off the loan with $20,000. So the people who have this extremely well-connected access, and they have the capital, and they have the connection with the banks, even if this person is not connected to the government directly, they can multiply their money because they can make money off of inflation. And so who ends up paying for all of this is, of course, the people who have no savings, who have no contacts with the banks, and who really they don't have the ability to do something like this. So it's a system that polarizes and makes inequality even bigger. Another thing that's happening is that some people have been trying to use Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies to get more people into get rich quick schemes, things like pyramid schemes, and so they try to get people to invest their small savings into fantastical schemes that promise a lot of returns, and since cryptocurrency can do this a little easier because it flows across borders very easily, and it is usually the most vulnerable who end up falling for these kinds of scams. This is a senior lady that we interviewed in Cucuta, and she was about to wire some money to the friend of her son, who is providing her or telling her about this opportunity. And when you're desperate and when you don't really know how these systems work, and if you don't have an awareness of pyramid schemes, then it's likely that you'll fall prey to things like this. So undermines confidence. Let's talk about resilient. So Venezuelans endure constant swings between modern and primitive existences. So this is kind of like a domino effect. In Venezuela, you might have seen in the news lately that there's frequent blackouts, there's internet outages, and then when you experience something like this, it's not only that you can't transact. Let's say if you are using mobile banking, it's not like you can't transact in the moment of the purchase or the transaction. It's also that this creates more problems in your life. So if you don't have electricity at home, for example, you might have to stay at home and not work because maybe it doesn't make sense for you to go to work if there's no electricity in your area, or if there's no running water, and you have kids, maybe you have to stay. So these things pile on top of each other, and it's unpredictable. One day you might have a very seemingly normal day that you could have here as well, and the next day you could have a very difficult situation that you're basically living in pre-modern times. So it's challenging to design for an environment like this. Income from the informal economy often eclipses paid salaries. So a lot of people are kind of ditching or putting in pause their careers in order to be able to put food on the table. So this is a university professor that we interviewed that actually earns more money now doing kind of menial tasks for undergrad students abroad And this company doesn't even pay her in dollars or in foreign currency. This is a company that's set up to kind of underpay people that have professional skills in Venezuela, and they take advantage of the fact that the labor is very cheap in Venezuela, and they pay in local currency. And then, but she still is kind of happy with that arrangement because it allows her to put money on the table, to put food on the table, because if salaries are fixed in like an institution like at the university, it's unrealistic to expect that they'll raise your salary every month if inflation is hitting 50% each month. So then. Yeah, we interviewed a lot of migrants in Colombia. So we saw that leaving Venezuela is like going from a sinking ship to a lifeboat with a few provisions. So people think that they have this hope for the moment when they're finally going to leave Venezuela and all their problems are going to be solved. And often it's the case that when they arrive, they either have like difficulties getting documentation, or they don't have family support, like emotional support, or like a social or safety net. And so they start facing more problems, and they also feel pressure to send money home. And sending money home, as we saw, is sometimes dangerous because you don't know whom to trust. There's very few institutions, and it's not, you have to do the two moves within two systems thing, or trust somebody to do it for you. And so it's complex, right? And then open, so the three last insights. Nobody wants to use the Bolivar, which is the local currency, but it's still necessary to survive. This kind of surprised me because I thought that everyone in Venezuela, by this time at least, would be using the dollar or something similar, like maybe DAI, right? But this is me thinking as a technologist and someone who has access to all this and thinks all this is very easy. But if you think about it, the only asset that is actually widely distributed in Venezuela is the Bolivar. And people have they do have bank accounts, and they can trade with each other using these bank accounts. Sometimes because it's almost all transactions are electronic because the government doesn't print enough cash, so it's difficult to transact in cash. But still, people in their very small communities, in their very in the day-to-day life, they either transact electronically when they can, or they just leave it for the next day. And so, and mostly people don't have ready access to dollars because getting dollars in cash is a hassle. You have to go to the black market. Now they've tried to liberalize it a little bit more, but still there's not enough dollars in cash to go around in Venezuela, and there's no easy way for me to buy dollars and sell dollars. Some people are using Bitcoin instead of dollars because the local Bitcoin is actually very liquid, and it's very easy to move money between Bolivars and Bitcoin. But the lesson is that even though the asset is absolutely worthless, or at least to us, it is worth something to people, and it has to be used as a medium of exchange because there's just no alternative. And so these bills are all less than 10 years old, and they're now being used as decorations. They are used to construct decorations like this, and artifacts, artisanal artifacts and stuff. So product sellers have the power to choose between to choose the means of payment. So if you are a merchant that has access to a scarce product, you can decide, okay, I only want people who can pay me using Zelle, which is the US bank-to-bank transfer system that is implemented across many banks, and some people in Venezuela have access to this because they have accounts in the US. And so you can say, okay, if you want this medicine, for example, you have to pay me using this means of payment. I won't take dollars in cash because I don't know if they're fake, or I don't like torn bills, which sometimes happens, or I'm just selling it to the people who have access to this, which is it cuts off many people who would otherwise be able to reach these products. So this is a testimony from a young guy. He looked everywhere for his mom medicine. None of the stores had it, so we went to Instagram. And again, social networks play a big role in finding products. And then, so he didn't have Zelle, and the merchant asked him to pay in Zelle, but luckily his uncle did. So his uncle, who lives in the States, even fronted the money for the medicine, and it all was good. But if you don't have these kinds of family connections or the good fortune to have someone living abroad and having access, then you have to find maybe someone else in your extended network who might cheat you or who might just not provide you with the favor. And then when you live in Venezuela, there's no good way to save, which is very strange to us and then very, very remarkable, because without the ability to save, you can't do much in that financial system, right? So when I'm going to the movies or my mom is going grocery shopping, I change Bitcoin into Bolivars at that very moment. It's easier and faster to exchange Bitcoin than dollars in cash. So this is an extreme outlier, right? This is a young woman who is college educated, and her boyfriend started mining Bitcoin some time ago and got her into that. And then they have some savings in Bitcoin. And of course, the savings fluctuate, but she feels that her money is much safer there, even though it fluctuates, than in the bank account where it will just go to zero. So, and then she also doesn't have access to a dollar account anywhere, and she could trade it for dollars in cash, but she knows that it's easier for her to not have to deal with anyone in the black market or in person, not have to expose herself to that risk, and just use local Bitcoins to cash out at any time. So she's willing to take the volatility of Bitcoin risk because of the convenience. And also, this is the same guy that we talked about earlier. He pays his maid in dollar bills, but then he keeps the bills in his house because the maid doesn't want to take him home, because it's dangerous, she could get mugged on the way. So he is effectively functioning as her bank. And then some people have tried experimenting with dollar-denominated digital money. So this isn't really cryptocurrency. It's not. RTM is a company that provides exchange services. So they want to do something like what Local Bitcoins is doing, and they keep the money in a bank account in the U.S. and they provide these digital wallets to people. And so they're making some inroads, and some people are increasingly considering the RTM dollar as kind of equivalent to the dollar, but it still depends on RTM, on a single company, to be able to redeem that into bolivars, and so it's not ideal. So the takeaway is that there's no ideal way to save. So people are trying anyway they can. So either Bitcoin, electronic money that may or may not work, or you use someone else to keep the money for you. You use a bank account abroad of some family member and so on. But if you want to keep your money, if you want to save money, and you only have access to a Bolivar bank account, then you can't really do it. And so talking about opportunity areas, how might we enable access, right? So let's talk about how we typically consider the questions of access. And then in the confident realm, if you want to ensure that people have confident access to a financial system, we usually say, let's try to design a system that avoids putting trust, that avoids having trust. But I would challenge that and say, let's try to design systems that leverage trust that people already kind of naturally have in their communities, in their networks, so that they can feel safe when they're transacting. And so what if, for example, we design a program where there are digital banking ambassadors that teach, these are kind of tech-savvy people that teach their local communities, okay, this is what Bitcoin is, or this is what this electronic money is, this is DAI, and then this is how you can transfer it or use it. And then if there were really tools to do something like this, then this would boost the amount of people who have access to an open financial system, and that could effectively access. And then you leverage the trust that you have on someone that is more knowledgeable than you, and but that you really trust. And that one by one, it's easier to convince people to use these systems, right? Growing Circles Marketplace. So what if you're dealing with a product that you don't know where it came from, you don't trust the seller, for example, you can have a marketplace that tells you, okay, you share 6 friends in common with the seller, or you have this many degrees of separation, and so that way you can decide, okay, I want to transact with this person, or even if you're talking about the black market, maybe you can visually see that 3 of your friends have transacted with this particular money changer, and so it's likely that this person won't cheat on you because he hasn't cheated on your friends, and so there's like reputation systems. And some of the products that are available today, like local Bitcoins, have like a kind of a reputation system, but this would be a way to expand that into not just changing money, but also in accessing products. So, resilient. How do we ensure consistent access even under bad infrastructure? So there are ways that you could, for example, have a wallet or like a pair of wallets that can communicate account or transaction information to each other without necessarily being both connected to the internet. And I know that this exposes the system to double spends, and what if people hack the wallet, and what if they make another version that doesn't actually broadcast when it's done, and so on. And these are things that we might be afraid of in the theoretical world of computer security, but in the context that people operate in, it's very unlikely that offline mobile transfer systems get like massively hijacked or massively taken advantage of, because in a real context, you're probably going to have to transact with the same merchant over and over many times. So you have no incentive to really double spend once and then buy. And so we can rethink a little bit about our very strict security requirements. We can rethink some of those and say, okay, how do people in the real world transact? Is it the same people? Is there trust in the system? How can we leverage that? And then we could have something like bills, so smart cards with a chip that then an NFC phone can read and can verify that this is the money is actually there. The private key is embedded in the card, and then the money can be taken out, and so you could verify whether this bill is authentic or not. And then again, in a situation where you don't have connectivity all the time, this might not work all the time, but it might work enough of the time to be considered something similar to what you would do with a US dollar bill or with a euro bill. And then open, so we want systems to be accessible to everyone in practice and not just in theory. So for example, if we were to have a wallet, let's say it's a DAI wallet that allows, or XDAI that is faster and low fees and so on, because we expect people to transact with this all day, every day. We need a way to convince people that this is real money, that is flowing in the system, because otherwise it looks like a game where you have a high score and then you don't really have a way to move money in and out. So you can use the systems that are replaced today. For example, local Bitcoins is a way to transform Bolivars into Bitcoin. There's a liquid marketplace. You could either build such a marketplace for this new asset and create liquidity. That takes time. Or you could also do 2 hops and then transform from, let's say, US dollars in the US to something like Bitcoin, and then the Bitcoin you can move with local Bitcoins in Venezuela, and then that way you can ensure that people are actually trusting, or you can make more people trust the system like this. And then money changer multiplier. What if more people in Venezuela could act as money changers? Because you have access, by the virtue of having a bank account in Venezuela, you have access to one jurisdiction, which is the national jurisdiction. And then also by virtue of being able to have a Bitcoin address, you can also have access to another jurisdiction. So if we combine the fact that in Venezuela, you have access to Venezuela and Bitcoin, and then another person in Europe or in the US might have access to European jurisdiction and Bitcoin, then we could do multiple hops and then allow people to be part of a money-changing network that could be able to move money around. And I know this it will be challenging to align the incentives to prevent cheating and a lot of the problems that we will see here in products like this. And this is just provocations. It's not meant to be like the idea for a product that we're going to build tomorrow. But we're gonna encounter a lot of human problems, and this is just, I guess, starting of the discussion of what if we do something like this. And then universal point of sale system. What if the guy who couldn't pay for his mom medicine in Zelle, what if there were a way that he could get that money flowing onto Zelle by other means? So if he was able to find an intermediary that accepted Bolivars because he needed Bolivars and then get rid of some of his Zelle dollars, then the system would like create the connections that are necessary and then allow him to pay the merchant indirectly by doing multiple hops, and then the merchant would eventually get the Zelle dollars. And of course, there would be commissions and incentives in the middle, but it could be, from the perspective of the user, this would allow him to transact in a system that is like more now is open for him. And what if we could have accounts that are shared between family members? So because we know that private key management is hard, and there are very large differences between people who can manage these like reasonably well and people who are not used to this. So what if we have an account that is shared among someone who's making money in Colombia and sending money back home in Venezuela? What if the sending of money wasn't really a send, but like the account could be shared among all of them? And then if my mom, for example, if I'm in Colombia, I'm working, and my mom is in Venezuela, and I want to put money in her account, maybe I just load the account in Colombia, that is our shared account, and then there's a way that she can tell me, hey, can you like give me Bolivars now, or transform some of the money into Bolivars, and then I can see that this account is there, and then I can either teach her how to use local bitcoins to get access, or maybe this can be connected to something like local bitcoins, and then it could be a way that we kind of use the money together. Because people in the real world, they use it's not as individual as we might see here. When people are under like these like extreme circumstances, they band together and they share bank accounts, they share passwords, and it's very normal for people to do this. And so I want to talk a little bit about small engineering victories. Coinbase released a light version of their wallet, so and then Give Crypto is experimenting with giving people money in cryptocurrency in some parts of Venezuela. And so this didn't used to work in the kinds of phones that Venezuelans had, because a lot of Venezuelans have Android phones that are running Android 4, Android 5, so devices from 2014, 2015. And now Coinbase realized that okay, this is something that we have to address if we want to give crypto to people. People need to have wallets that actually work. And so we're happy that they released this and they're trying it. Right now it only supports Ether, but I'm sure that they'll work out a way to allow people either access to more assets, or maybe the answer is not answer to more assets, but rather something like the dollar, which people tell us all the time that they want, and how do we ensure that they believe it's a dollar? Again, it needs to be built up. The liquidity needs to be built up, and these things can be abstracted away only if there's enough liquidity in the system and if there's enough belief. And so, and then there's this wallet that I have been working on for some time, and it is optimized for Android 4 and Android 5, and it uses payment links to send money around, so you don't have to use addresses. And for example, a product like Argent wallet is something that would be amazing if they could if it could run on like devices like this, and if it could be stripped down to the very basics of okay, receive money, send money, everything's in dollars. There's no list of assets that you can manage, and so something like this I think would be helpful. And so thank you. These are the people and the institutions that made possible our research, and I think we have maybe some time for questions. And please follow us on Twitter, and let's keep posted. Thank you. I don't know if anyone wants to ask a question. Maybe for the recording, you need the microphone, right?
Hi, thanks. I'm not sure if I missed it, but maybe if you can summarize how big the adoption is. So how many people and which kind of people are really using Bitcoin? Because it seems so an obvious and good solution.
Well, so it's good for putting your money in an asset that doesn't devalue. It's, as we saw, it's not ideal. We didn't. It's really difficult to tell how many people exactly are using Bitcoin. We can see figures like the daily volume of local Bitcoins is $1.2 million a day. So there's significant money being moved around there. And if you Since it's a very closed economy, it's very difficult to get like data. But I've seen reports from like economists that are in the country that the total flow of money in and out of the country is about 10 or 12 million dollars a day. So it means that local Bitcoins is being used for about 10% of the forex trade in Venezuela, which is huge. In terms of numbers of people, if I had to venture a number, I would say it's less than 5% of the population. It's not a lot. There are many reasons for this. You know, local Bitcoins doesn't really run very well on phones, and people don't really have computers. People mostly don't know or don't care what Bitcoin is. They have maybe heard of it because of what the government wanted to do with the petro, and they like heard of the term cryptocurrency. Some people, we asked what they thought about Bitcoin, and they associated it with scams because the petro was it was never launched, and they have bad associations with whatever the government does. So there's a lot of reasons why Bitcoin has not been more widely used. But for the people who do use it, they do find it very useful. And what we would like to do is to open up this access, and to do it, I think one key thing is to use an asset that is pegged to the US dollar, because that's what people tell you that they want. And so it historically has been the store of value and the asset that people aspire to. So that could be, even if you could see it like as a gateway to other assets that are like also stable or more preferable or deflationary, whatever you want to like tell people. But I think at first what people need is this sense of stability that they don't have with the Bolivar, and then the dollar represents that for them. And yeah, just creating more systems that are open and that are like based on how people live their day-to-day lives is, I think, important. So.
Thank you for the presentation. Yep. Very interesting. If you look outside of Venezuela, are there any other regions, any other countries where you see some parallels, which this was perhaps not in that extreme example, but where this makes sense or you see that resonate?
Sure. Argentina, for example. In Argentina, I think they had an overnight crash of the national currency of like 30 to 40% after there were primary elections. So I think that a lot more, like in Argentina, there's already a big cryptocurrency community. People are enthusiastic about Bitcoin and about DAI and about escaping the national currency, and they have a history of being denied or being forced out of the US dollar. Sometimes they have accounts in US dollars or denominated in US dollars, and then the government says, oh, just kidding, it's actually pesos now, and it's going to be at this rate. And so there's a lot of PTSD about it, and having an asset that is not, that you can't do that to, I think it is very appealing. I don't know enough, but I would like to research more about it. Maybe that's one of the future directions that we're going to.
Outside Latin America?
Iran, for example, would be interesting because, it is a very isolated country by international sanctions, and it's a very tricky situation because, the sanctions don't allow normal, like regular people to transact. In the case of Venezuela, Venezuela has also has sanctions, but the government of Venezuela is the one that has sanctions. So regular Venezuelans can still normally transact with the U.S. financial system and with others, but in Iran, it's the trade sanctions are much more harsher. So I would say that even though Iran might want to use cryptocurrency to get out of this, since the U.S. is putting a lot more effort into blocking everyone, because they don't know, I guess they don't know who they can trust or who actually works for the government, who doesn't. It's very difficult to tell. I think it could be interesting to study how the dynamics are, because I know next to nothing, but I would bet it's a lot more difficult than in a case like Venezuela or Argentina or Cuba, for example. Yeah. Right. Well, thank you.